Good morning and lovely to see you. Here today, I'm with Andrew Bridgen, who's joined me on Wise Women Weekdays. I'm very pleased to see you, Andrew. Hello, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. It's very busy. Just back from London last night. Yeah, there's a lot on. There's a lot going on, isn't there?
There's a lot going on, and I think I saw a video of you being interviewed, or you're chatting to, I think, this GB News, and that inspired me to reach out to you. I know we've been in touch through various means. We've never met. We've never had a one-to-one before. But when I saw that clip about your court case with Matt Hancock, I thought, wow, you are a warrior in the true sense of the word. You are fighting, obviously, for yourself, for the cause, for the people. What happened in London? What was all that about then last night? Anything interesting?
It's another court case, not my case with Hancock. This was a family who came to me 2.5 years ago. They believed that the father he was in his 80s. He'd got a bit of dementia. They believe he was suffering with gout. He went into a hospice for some respite care, and the family believed that he was euthanized with midazolam and morphine. Within 3 days of arriving, he was immediately injected, went unconscious without the permission of the family. And that was the second day of a coroner's hearing of 5 days in London, which will go on all of this week. And so I felt obliged, and I wanted to come and support the family for the first 2 days of their hearing in London, which is an unprecedented case, really. There are 8 doctors and nurses potentially who could face an allegation of unlawful killing, who administered the lethal drugs. I personally believe that NG 163, which is quite infamous, NICE Guideline 163, which was introduced by Matt Hancock, I think on the 4th of April 2020, in response to COVID-19. I believe that was may well be responsible for the deaths of tens of thousands of vulnerable elderly who were moved out of hospital into care homes and nursing homes, many of them without their medication, but they were sent with end-of-life drugs, NG 163. And it's interesting that midazolam and morphine is a respiratory suppressant. Why would you possibly give a respiratory suppressant to someone you suspected may have had COVID-19 and have trouble breathing? But of course, people who died because of the midazolam and morphine would exhibit all the symptoms, breathlessness of COVID. I asked the government in a written question some years ago how many vulnerable elderly were moved out of hospitals in early 2020, April 2020, to make way for the expected first wave of COVID patients, which I don't believe ever appeared, and how many of those who were moved out of hospitals into care homes and nursing homes had died within 7, 14, 21, 28, 56, 72 days, and on their death certificate said A, COVID-19, B, other causes. And the government came back and said they didn't hold any of that data, which means that they have no idea how many elderly were moved out of, vulnerable elderly were moved out of hospital in early 2020, and they have no idea what happened to them. Well, Karen, I think I know what happened to them, having spoke to people who are working in care homes, contractors and families. I believe they were the first wave of COVID deaths, which drove up the hysteria to get people to take up the experimental vaccines. As far as I know, I'm the only MP ever raised anything in the chamber of the House of Commons about NG 163. Now, interestingly, NG stands for NICE Guidelines. All the NICE Guidelines historically, even though NG 163 has been superseded by NG 191, and I believe the midazolam element of NG 191 was removed in November 23. So that was considered not safe. I asked questions about, is that an admission that midazolam should never have been used? But I never got an answer out of the government. But although NG163 has been superseded, every historic NICE guideline is available on the NHS website for historic analysis, except for one, Karen. That's NG163, which all traces have been deleted. I asked the government if they deleted it because they were embarrassed about it, and they certainly should be. But again, I didn't get an answer from the minister. It's deeply, deeply worrying.
Avoid asking you when you're so direct, and you're privy to well, you're near to the information as near as you can get. How do they avoid answering these questions?
Just never ever. They'll say things like they'll put a minister up who's not from the department that's supposed to be answering the question. So he'll say, "Oh, we'll have to write to you with all the answers." And they never do. Or the minister will just blank it. They don't want to answer questions.
And in the whole of Parliament, you haven't got any buddies? Is nobody supporting you at all? What do they say, your colleagues?
There are a few people who would help a bit with the vaccine harms and the excess deaths, but there was no one who was interested in talking about the euthanization of vulnerable elderly. And I believe that has been going on ever since COVID. It's effectively an actual, pretty much a repeat of the Liverpool pathway, something I remember speaking and voting against and voting down in 2014 in Parliament. It was made, it was removed from NHS. Well, I think it's back in, and no one wants to talk about it. And it's deeply worrying now that there's an assisted dying bill, which again, I remember speaking against when I was in Parliament and voting it down, which is now rushing its way breathlessly through our Parliament. And I would put to your listeners that the reason they want to bring in assisted dying is because euthanasia without authorization has been going on in the NHS for a very, very long time.
It does leave me speechless just talking to you about this, because I think so many of us are aware of what has been going on behind the scenes, but now it's coming to the fore.
Well, also, I believe that the NHS now has quotas for euthanasia. When you arrive, if you're over 60, sometimes a bit older, you'll have a vulnerability score carried out on you by a senior clinician. Some of them are only taking 45 seconds. And in that, they'll look at your health records, your comorbidities. And if you score more than 6, and you've gone in for treatment, you're not going to get treatment. You're going to get put on the death pathway. And you get 6 points for dementia or Alzheimer's. So what that's saying to me is, if you've got dementia or Alzheimer's,
you're on the list.
You don't really want to go into hospital.
No.
And personally, my own experience now of what I've found out, I wouldn't go anywhere near the NHS. Personally, I don't think I'd make it out if I went in with a splinter in my finger.
Well, I think they've got their eye on you. Let's put it that way. So that leads me to the court case that you were with Matt Hancock. What was that about, and why has it gone on so long? What's the real reason?
In January 23, I tweeted out a tweet with an attachment, which was a paper from a Dr. Josh Getchko of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, who is a Jewish gentleman I'm very well acquainted with. He's not, he's a social scientist, mainly criminology. And he had gone through the Pfizer papers and had found some very interesting data from, they're the Pfizer papers that Pfizer didn't want released for 75 years, that the American Supreme Court forced them to release early, which they didn't want to. He's the doctor, the criminologist. He's very good at following the paper trail, and he's the one that uncovered and told me that the vaccine that we were all given was not the same vaccine that passed approval. Batch 1 and batch 2. We can talk about that in a bit, and the evidence for that is overwhelming. Again, I raised that with the Prime Minister and in the Chamber of House of Commons, but nobody wanted to talk about it, and the evidence of that is unequivocal. So the vaccine that we were all given was untested, and we suspect it's at least 5 times more dangerous than the vaccine that was authorized, which was dangerous enough, 1 in 600. Well, that would make it down to a severe adverse event of 1 in 100, maybe more, a severe adverse event, including death. And people were expected to take multiple doses of the same. So you've got the same chance every time you take a booster. Well, I mean, I've met people who've had 10, Karen, now. I mean, they're playing Russian roulette. And that's without the other harms from the DNA contamination in the vials, which have been proven all over the world. And again, I've spoke about that years ago, but no one would listen. So I got Josh Getchko's one of his papers, and I tweeted it out with a quote that said that, as a world-leading cardiologist told me, this is the rollout of effectively the rollout of the COVID-19 vaccines is the biggest crime against humanity since the Holocaust, right? And I was declared as an anti-Semite, and I was suspended immediately from the Conservative Party. Matt Hancock engineered a Prime Minister's question on the same day, a few hours after I tweeted, and accused me of anti-Semitism, being unscientific, anti-vax, and I think a racist. And he has privilege in the chamber. You can pretty much say what you want, but he tweeted it out afterwards, and that does not have privilege. It was reinforcing something that was completely untrue. And I was encouraged to take him to court for defamation. I mean, clearly calling someone anti-Semitic. Now, there's a very clear definition of anti-Semitism. It is to deny the Holocaust, or to belittle it, or well, not to belittle it, and clearly saying that the rollout of the vaccine, the COVID-19 vaccines, was a very bad thing, but not as bad as the Holocaust, is not denying the Holocaust. In fact, you're saying that the Holocaust was the worst thing that's happened in humanity. So they've got no grounds on that. Hancock knows he's on dodgy ground. He's never gone with the defense of truth of his tweet accusing me of anti-Semitism, etc. That's because he knows he can't prove it wasn't anti-Semitic. One would have to say then, since he's a clever man and he knows what the legal definition of anti-Semitism is, he knew that when he did it, which also is probably the reason he never named me in the chamber. He just said, this morning, an MP. So he didn't name me, and neither did Sunak in his answer. Now, we've analysed all of this, and you can see that in the chamber, both Hancock and Sunak are reading from prepared notes. So clearly they had decided how they were going to deal with this. I believe they'd taken legal advice, thinking that if they didn't name me, but used innuendo that everyone would know it was me, it would make it harder for me to seek justice against them for defaming me. And that is true to an extent. So they'd clearly, one could say they'd had a little conspiracy. They'd conspired. All the way through for 2 years, Hancock's delayed, put his evidence in late. He's never put a witness statement signed by himself in, because he doesn't ever want to be in the witness box and cross-examined on that statement. And that would lead me to believe that he doesn't want to talk about anything about the vaccines on oath, because he knows that it will come back and bite him in the very near future. So last November, we were supposed to have a CMC, a case management hearing in the Royal Courts of Justice to move the case forward to final hearing, decide on things like the final issues, how many days we need to be in court and all that. And 3 weeks before it, Hancock's team put another strikeout application in to try and stop the case moving forward. And we heard that with delays due to barristers' availability, that was heard only last week, in fact, a week ago today, in the Royal Courts of Justice. I tried not to have the CMC struck out. And there's been some amazing, strange things going on in this case. So when we'd got, I think the CMC had been in the diary for many, many months, the case management meeting, 26th of November from memory. And I think it was around about the 6th of November, we had this application come in, and it was on a Thursday. And I emailed the Royal Courts of Justice immediately and said, well, where does this leave us? Because it's not only the extra cost of another £50,000, potentially £100,000 for an extra hearing day. It's also the fact that it stops the case moving forward. It's another distraction, another delay of another 6 months, which all costs money. And nowadays, it's very, very hard to take anyone to court to get justice if they've got a lot more money than you, because all they do is delay, and just bleed you out. That is the plan. So I wrote to the court straight after the application arrived, the notification of their application. And the court came back very helpfully the next morning and said, we're so busy, Mr. Bridgen. We couldn't look at any applications for a month. So I knew then that we'd get the CMC in and move the case forward on the 26th of November. And mysteriously then, by the following Wednesday, only 3 working days after I've got an email from the court saying they couldn't look at anything for a month, Hancock's side have already got dates for their hearing. And also they're suggesting a judge. They're suggesting they wanted to choose a judge who was Judge Nicklin. Now,
are they allowed to do that, Andrew? Can you select it? No. So it's unlawful, illegal.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, no. I mean, if I'd agreed to Nicklin, I'm sure we could have petitioned. But I mean, I was never going to agree to Nicklin. Nicklin is the judge who put the contempt order on Tommy Robinson. Mm-hmm. I pointed out that I'd been on television defending Tommy Robinson and attacking the judiciary, in particular Nicklin, for his decision to put a contempt order on Tommy Robinson for exposing the truth. I don't know if you've seen his documentary Silenced. It's been watched 160 million times. It's very, very good. And it shows that there's been a miscarriage of justice regarding to the case in the north of England at the school. Well, I said, well, I can't possibly have Nicklin because A, he's had nothing to do with this case so far. We've had 2 judges, Collins, Rice and Stain, and we don't need a third one. And also, there's another concern here of bias or influence, because Matt Hancock's barrister is a man called Aidan Eardley, King's Counsel, who mysteriously, during this case over 2 years, he's been made up to a part-time judge on the same bench as the judges who are judging us. So he's now sitting on the same bench. He was made up during this trial, so he's got his promotion. But he, interestingly, is the barrister that the Attorney General selected only a few months ago to prosecute and put Tommy Robinson in prison. And clearly, because it was Nicklin's decision, the contempt order, in my opinion, it could be seen that Nicklin owes Aidan Eardley a favour. And they're all judges now on the same bench as well. And so I objected to that, and we didn't end up with Nicklin. But even to suggest you could shop for your own judge, I mean, that is not allowed. And I said I didn't want the CMC, and then the judge came back. They said a judge has decided that the CMC, the case management hearing, will be vacated. And I said, well, you can't do that. I wrote back to the court and said, you can't do that because no one's applied to have the CMC vacated to delay the case again for another 6 months. And it's clear that someone at the court must be talking to my opponent's legal team, because 3 hours after I sent that email to the court, not to the other side, an application to vacate the CMC appeared from the other side without any further correspondence. And then I said, well, I don't want to. You know, we need to move the case forward, not delay it. And the Judge Stain said on a Thursday night, said, you can do them, but give your reasons in writing by 10:30 on Monday morning. So that was 24 hour, clear 24 hours working time. the court guidelines are very clear. You have to have at least 3 working days, not weekends, working days, to respond to a court letter. And they gave me 24 hours. That suggests to me they didn't want any objections. Anyway, I put my objections in. My barrister and I worked all over. It was Remembrance Sunday weekend. I wanted to go to one of the services, but I couldn't because I had to do that legal work. And of course, the court rejected my application, cancelled the CMC, and we haven't moved the case forward now in nearly 12 months, despite lots of expense, probably £100,000 of expense. We have not moved the case forward. Now we had that hearing in front of Collins Rice at the Royal Courts of Justice last Wednesday. It was an all-day hearing. I think my barrister did as good a job as you could possibly do. We are now waiting for the judgment. If it goes Hancock's way, if the judge goes Hancock's way, my case will be dismissed and I'll get hit with a huge cost order. If not, we'll move the case forward. But we've certainly been delayed already for another 6 months. It's a travesty of justice now in this country, and it does have the appearance of considerable bias.
There's nowhere for you to go, is there, to complain about all this stuff that's going on, which is incredibly unjust, to say the least. I'm trying to be mindful of my words here. So there's nowhere to go other than to talk about it, I guess, and bring awareness to the public.
Well, hopefully, through my experience, people are going to get those who are paying attention and interested will glean that perhaps the justice system, our policing system, our parliamentary system is not quite how people think it ought to be or think it was. I mean, I've been on the inside of all of this, and I've come to the conclusion that our great establishments in this country, not all the apples in the barrel are rotten.
Yeah.
But as far as I can see, the apples at the top of all the barrels are rotten, and any apple that seeks to rise to the top has to be rotted, and that is the problem. If you're not corruptible, you're going nowhere.
Because you said the key word, the corruption, isn't it? Which is yeah.
Well, it's an example of that, Karen, and this shocked me. When I spoke out in December 22 about the vaccines vigorously, just to remind people where we were, the Medicines and Healthcare Product Regulatory Agency, the MHRA, the regulator, medicines regulator in the UK, that they had asked the government to authorise the experimental COVID-19 vaccines to be administered to children, babies down to the age of 6 months. My concerns had been raised by then. There's no healthy child of that age that's died of COVID-19. I was well aware that the risks of a severe adverse event from the vaccines were at least 1 in 600, including death. And I just wasn't willing to stand by and let the government authorise those experimental vaccines to kill and maim small children. I mean, if that's what we're coming to Parliament for, I mean, that's it. And I knew there'd be a huge backlash against me. I mean, I'm not stupid. So what I needed colleagues to stand with me and give me some protection. And I went round to colleagues and asked them and said, look, you know, these are the facts. Can't let this happen. We've got to stop it. And I was just shocked. I mean, so many of them told me that they'd got vaccine harms themselves, or they got relatives who were vaccine harmed. One colleague told me he'd had 2 heart attacks after 2 Pfizer shots. This is back in November 2022. And I thought, well, that's it. You're going to speak out. And they all refused. Others told me that they'd got, you know, heart conditions. And, you know, and then I had a meeting with a very senior colleague who I respected and thought was a friend, really. You know, I'd stayed at his house, I'd met his wife and children. And after an hour and a half in his office, and also I knew that his own sister, he hadn't told me, but I knew his own sister had to go into hospital with chest pains after the Pfizer jab. And at the end of an hour and a half, when I was talking about the vaccine harms, protecting the children, he turned around to me and said, "Andrew, there is currently no political appetite for your views on the vaccines. There may be in 20 years' time, and you're probably going to be proven right then. But in the meantime, you need to bear in mind you're taking on the most powerful vested interest in the world with all the personal risk for you that will entail." And I just said, well, I think this meeting's over, isn't it? You know, I'm out here. So that's why I had to stand on my own. But, and I was thrown out of the Conservative Party on spurious grounds, just like Rupert Lowe's being thrown out now out of Reform for speaking the unspeakable, that illegal migrants who've broken into our country should be deported. How outrageous is that? I mean, most countries have that as their rules. I think in Russia, if you break into Russia illegally, you get 2 years hard labor, then they deport you, which sounds like a deterrent to me. Anyway, so this is what I found. My only conclusion is these people are completely compromised. They can't do the right thing because they're either scared of taking on Big Pharma with all the personal risk for you which that will entail, or they've got blackmail on them. And you know, when someone says to me, I mean, Andrea Jenkins has came out only last week or the week before and said that her sister was a nurse and she was paralyzed from the neck down after taking the Moderna booster. Well, she told me that in July 23. And I begged her and I said, look, Andrea, she said to me, came to me in the House of Commons and said, Andrew, you're right about the vaccines. My sister's taken the Moderna booster and now she's paralyzed from the neck down. I said, Andrea, I'm really sorry to hear that. I'm really sorry to hear that. But now you've got a duty. You've got to speak out. You're a minister. People are going to listen to you. They can't brush you off. And you know, another voice speaking out about the vaccines with personal experience would be really helpful, and we can stop this madness. We're hurting people. I said, you've got a duty to your constituents. And she said, well, my sister's a nurse and they coerced her in the NHS into taking the booster. She didn't really want to. And now she's paralyzed from the neck down. So she's at the mercy of the NHS. She said, and if I speak out about it, you know how the NHS are with whistleblowers, how vindictive they are. I said, well, you don't have to mention your sister. I said, you've got 100,000 constituents like I've got. You'll have loads of emails about these vaccines. Don't mention your sister. Anyway, she turned on her heels and said she wasn't going to speak out, and she never did until last week when the damages continued to be done. But the government never dared, after I spoke out on the 13th of December and got that debate, the government never dared authorise those vaccines for the children.
No, that's one good thing. Are you finding that some of the ministers like Andrea are now changing their stance and they are beginning to speak out since this all kicked off in 2020? Is there any change?
We're certainly seeing in the mainstream media, certainly the Mail Online and a few other newspapers, we're seeing now reports of vaccine harms and excess deaths and deaths from the vaccines, but they're still being called very rare, and they're not rare. We're seeing some stuff on GB News, which is interesting. There was some young reporter there who said that, you know, oh, we've got this report from the Cleveland Clinic showing that, you know, that's a report that I sent them more than 2 years ago from Cleveland, Ohio. I think it's one of the biggest hospitals in the world. It has over 50,000 employees. And all they did for 3 months was track people on vaccine status and see whether they caught COVID. And the fact was that all their data, and this wasn't what the survey was set up for. Yeah. But what it showed was that the more vaccines you had, the more likely you were to catch COVID. And that fits in with my thesis that the COVID-19 vaccines are damaging our immune system. And the more vaccines you have, the more you're damaging your immune system, the more vulnerable you are to COVID-19, every other disease that's going, and of course cancer, because anything that damages your immune system will reduce your body's ability to control cancer. And that's what we've been seeing around the world, isn't it?
Well, it is, and hasn't our mate across the pond, with Mr. Elon Musk, haven't they, or are they not planning to create a vaccination for personal cancer issues?
Well, what I can tell you is that I've been in personal contact for some time with Robert Kennedy Jr. I think he's a good man. He's in charge now of the Health and Human Services Department, effectively the Department of Health in America. When I was expelled from the Conservative Party in about April, finally, after going through a kangaroo court where I wasn't even allowed to appear, then I was pretty shocked. You know, this is how they ostracized me. All the people I'd worked with, I thought were my friends for 12 and a half years, nearly 13 years in Parliament. Nobody contacted me. Nobody came to see me. No one even texted me or rang me. But within an hour of the announcement from the Conservative Party, I got a phone call on my mobile from a US presidential candidate. It was Robert Kennedy Jr. And he said, I'll back you.
Wow.
And I'm also his appointment to the head of the National Institute for Health, which is the position that the very questionable Anthony Fauci used to occupy, is a man called Dr. Jay Bhattacharya. I know him too. And he is a wonderful man with great humanity, and I've got confidence in these two gentlemen that they're going to do the right thing. It was announced yesterday that Bobby Kennedy has asked the NIH to suspend all funding of mRNA technology medications in the US, and they're backing. So we're building up. He's going to have to expose. I mean, also, something I asked the UK government repeatedly for, to sort the issue of whether the COVID-19 vaccines were safe and effective, was to release what we call the record level data. That's the data the government holds on all of us, of how many vaccines we've had, the date we've had them, and if we've died, the date of death. It'll have your date of birth on there. And from that data alone, we can, in 24 hours, with the number crunchers, some statisticians, we can work out whether the vaccines are helpful or they're not helpful. And that will be, and every government holds that data. It's called the vaccine register. Of course, the government over here said that they couldn't because it's confidential. Well, I mean, all you have to do is take the names out, anonymize the data. You know, they can do it. They've already given all that data to the big pharma companies who created these experimental vaccines, which I believe have caused our society huge damage. And the fact that they won't release that data, and they've never released it in America, despite the fact that the majority of Americans are now vaccine hesitant, and they could sort it all out. Well, the fact is that now that they're in control, Bobby Kennedy and Jay Bhattacharya and others, and they're good men, and good men recruit good men. Bad people recruit bad people. They've now only got a certain window because they are now privy to that record level data. They need to move to suspend these experimental vaccines as soon as possible, explain to the public what's been done to them, and start looking at how we can treat the vaccine harmed. Because otherwise they're going to be culpable. Because once you've got the information, you know, a crime is a crime, and covering up a crime is a crime in itself. Yes. And I wouldn't want them to be accused of that. So they do need to move now. And once America suspend these vaccines and expose the truth, and let's not diminish the pressure these people will be under from Big Pharma, which is a $2 or $3 trillion a year business in America. I don't doubt it, but I'm pleading with them to do the right thing for humanity. And then the dam will break over here, and there's going to be a lot of very worried politicians, and the media, the mainstream media over here, have been diabolical. But there's nothing new in that. I was actually the MP who exposed the Post Office Horizon scandal some 13, 14 years ago. I had all the evidence. I'd got the statements from the Fujitsu whistleblower leaked to me by Ron Warmington, the investigator, because he was my appointment. I recommended him to the government to do that investigation. And I knew he'd do it properly, and he's a very ethical man. And I went to, in Parliament, we have representatives of all the media. We have the BBC representatives, ITV, Sky, Channel 4, Channel 5, the Times, the Telegraph, the Mail. Journalists I've known a very long time. And I went to all of them, every single one, and said, look, here's all the evidence. This is back in 2013, 14. And I went to them repeated and said, look, here's all the evidence. Biggest miscarriage of justice in the UK history. These sub-postmasters are innocent. Here's the statements from the Fujitsu whistleblower. They've been altering the accounts remotely without their knowledge, the sub-postmaster's knowledge. That's it. That's the opposite of what was said in court. These convictions are all unsafe now because they're based on false evidence, which would prove will be false. You run this story, and as a journalist, you'll get an award for this. You'll get an award for it. I'm giving it to you. And every man and every woman of them wouldn't run it. And they didn't run it for 10 years. And everything that was in that ITV documentary about which went viral, I'd said in the House of Commons more than 10 years before, and no one had paid any attention to it. It was my constituent, Michael Rudkin, who was the Post Office Federation chair, who'd gone down before I was an MP, 2008, been accidentally shown everything at Fujitsu, got home, and then his poor wife, she was running the post office while he was doing these duties. It's not a coincidence, Karen, that the day after my constituent was accidentally shown everything that Fujitsu were doing with these computers and Horizon. When he got home the next morning, there was mysteriously a £44,000 shortfall on his wife's computer, and she was convicted, and they were discredited and ruined. That was deliberate. That wasn't a computer error. No. I do not believe that. And I picked that up when I became the MP in 2010, and everything flowed from there. There was nothing happening before then, and it had been covered up by Labour governments, Conservative governments. And what I found out was that the Horizon system was developed in the late 90s by Fujitsu. The government has spent £800 million on that software system. It was originally to pay benefits through the post office, housing benefit, pensions, etc., family allowance. They could never make it work. It got too many glitches in it. They didn't want to write it off, so the Labour government wrapped it up as a retail package and forced it onto the sub postmasters. They knew it was leaky all the time, and they watched all those people go to prison. They never said a word, and it was carried on under the Conservatives. And my suspicion is that's because the Conservative government wanted to sell off the post office, so they didn't want any problems. And they were quite happy to see people who were innocent go to prison, and that's why it took so long to expose. And it's interesting that ITV eventually did made the program about it in 2024, January 2024, I think it came out, just over a year ago. And I'd been to ITV, of course, 10 years ago with exactly that story, and they'd ignored me. Well, one person who got out of it quite nicely was Adam Crozier. He actually was in charge of Royal Mail, which the Post Office and Royal Mail were combined at the time. So he was in charge of the Post Office until 2010, when most of the damage was done prior to 2010. Indeed, my constituent was damaged before 2010 by that system. Well, of course, when I went in 2013-14 to ITV, Adam Crozier was the head of ITV. And of course, he didn't get mentioned in that program in 2024 because he'd gone from ITV then. But I mean, that was another cover-up, and he's got out of the inquiry. And it's interesting that although I was the MP who uncovered it to start with, they wrote me out of the story completely, and then wouldn't even let me give my evidence to the public inquiry, to Judge Wynne Williams' inquiry, even though I'd written to them every 6 months, and they'd always said, yes, we will call you, but not yet, not yet, not yet. And then at the end they said, no, we don't want you. They didn't want to hear what I was going to say. because I would have had David Cameron in there asking him why he'd allowed all these people. Tony Blair should have been in there. He knew that system was leaky and never said anything. And they didn't want that sort of people being.
The swamp is deep, isn't it, Andrew? The swamp is very deep.
And it's been going on for a long time. And then I'm not surprised that when over the last 3 or 4 years, when I've been going with questions and evidence about the vaccine harms and excess deaths to exactly the same journalists who blanked me 12 years ago about the post office, they did exactly the same. In fact, it wasn't just the journalists. I mean, they wouldn't even talk to me. They blacklisted me after I spoke out on the 13th of December 2022. I was never really on television ever again. I remember I did one interview with the BBC locally straight after that, and they said, "Why are you willing to sacrifice your political career on the hill of vaccine harms?" And I said, "Because that's the hill you're killing my people on, and you're trying to kill these children, and I'm not going to have it."
Where do you find your strength?
Well, I am a Christian, and I have prayed more the last 5 years since the madness started than I've ever prayed. Mostly I've prayed, Karen, that I'm wrong. I don't want to be right.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be right about the post office. I didn't want to be right about the modern slavery in Leicester. I didn't want to be right about HS2 being a disaster and actually a land grab. And I certainly didn't want to be right. I wanted to be wrong about the vaccines. I didn't want to believe that our government, our establishment have unleashed such horrors upon the people. Life would have been much less complicated if I was wrong. But unfortunately, I'm not. We have to live in the world as it is. So my strength comes from speaking the unpalatable truth and trying to. I saw my duty as an MP. Bear in mind, I was the MP for North West Leicestershire, which is the area I was brought up in. They're the people I went to school with. My former school teachers lived in this area, and they voted for me. And I've got a great loyalty to the people, and that's what I thought. That's what the job of an MP is to act in the best interests of my constituents, and that's what I did. And I know that I was standing on the truth, and especially when senior colleagues know that I'm saying the truth but won't speak the truth themselves, and especially when they tell me effectively. They want to cover all this up for 20 years. And of course, I've been asking for a debate on excess deaths in the UK Parliament from January 23. It took me 9 months of asking every week I could for a debate, putting in for a debate on excess deaths. It took me 9 months to get a debate on excess deaths, despite the fact we've got sort of 1,000 to 2,000 people excess dying every week after a pandemic when we should have had less than expected deaths. That's what you should have. We've never seen it. When are we going to have less than expected deaths? And in the end, I only got it because in the summer of 23, I did some research into thalidomide, and what I found was shocking. So thalidomide was created by a company called Grünenthal in Germany, and they'd recruited ex-Nazis scientists onto their medical team. Their head scientist was a guy called Heinrich Mulke, who'd been indicted for war crimes for experimenting on the Poles, but he didn't get convicted, and he became the head scientist at Grünenthal and developed a drug called thalidomide for nausea, which was prescribed to pregnant women to treat morning sickness. I found out that they gave it before they put the drug on the market. Grünenthal gave it away for free to their staff, and one of their employees gave it to his pregnant wife, and she gave birth to a baby with no ears, but they didn't say anything. They rolled it out. We know what happened. 60% of the babies died, and 40% were born with terrible afflictions. The selling point of thalidomide was that you couldn't overdose on it, so they said you could have as much as you want. And clearly, the damage. What we do know now is that thalidomide crossed the placenta-blood barrier. The blood-placenta barrier went to the fetus, and it prevents angiogenesis, which is the formation of blood vessels, which explains why they would have limbs of reduced size because they just couldn't grow. And obviously the amount of drug and the level, the stage of gestation when the pregnant mother took the drug, that affected the level of disability. But most of the babies would die anyway. They would be aborted. And it was stopped in 1961. What I found out from looking through records was that it was 1972 before the word thalidomide was allowed to be mentioned in the chamber of the House of Commons. 11 years cover up. It's happened before. And I wrote to the Speaker of the House of Commons, having applied every sitting week for 9 months for a debate on excess deaths. And I wrote and I sent him a copy of this little mini documentary. You can watch it on YouTube. It's called Thalidomide, I think, The Real Story. It's only about 15 minutes, but it's got all the paperwork in there and all the evidence, and it's pretty shocking. So Big Pharma had done it before. They paid out the victims, I think, in the end, about £5 million is all they paid out. They've made more profits on the drug than that. And they delayed for 11 years. So those families had struggled with those terribly disabled children without any compensation. Some of them would have been 12 and 13, 14 years old. And we all remember it from school. I mean, I can remember seeing children afflicted by that. I mean, they would be well in their 60s now. I put it to you that their needs will be higher now than they were when they were younger, because they'll have more health problems. I think there's about 3,000 left alive in the UK now. Anyway, I sent that documentary to the Speaker of the House of Commons and pointed out that I'd been putting in for this debate on excess deaths. So Lindsay Hoyle got that, and my note was, we don't want history to repeat itself, because 3 judges in Strasbourg had claimed that they believe that speakers of the House of Commons had deliberately suppressed all debate and questions on thalidomide for 11 years. And I said, I don't want it happening again. And mysteriously, within 2 weeks, he found me a date in October 23 for, I think it was the first ever debate anywhere in the world, any parliament in the world, on excess deaths. And we've been suffering them since the pandemic. But again, they were delaying and delaying, like a controlled release. And you know, once I spoke out about the vaccines, and I'd been around everybody, and and when I'd run out of friends well, they weren't friends, were they, in Parliament, I went to Nigel Farage, who I'd known for 10 years, who's a prominent broadcaster and a sort of political commentator at the time, and said to him, Nigel, I need your help. We've got to stop them jabbing the babies. He listened to him, and in front of witnesses at the end, he said, Andrew, I'm not speaking out about the vaccines, and if you know what's good for you, you won't either. What sort of society are we living in?
Hear him say that, are you in fear at all? Do you watch your back?
Well, I was approached by another senior politician, a cabinet minister, in February 23 after I'd spoken out, and I was going to continue to speak out. And I mean, this is the man who probably got me into politics 20 years before. And he put his arm around me and whispered in my ear. I mean, I just couldn't believe it. He said, Andrew, you can speak out about the vaccines all you want to. You're vaccinated, mate. You're going to be dead of cancer soon. And he walked off.
Okay. Pause for thought. Let's just I know we've been going for nearly an hour, and there's a lot more we could talk. Well, I could listen to you, but I just wanted to bring in what we mentioned yesterday when we were arranging this call about passing the baton, which I thought was a really good way of saying what's just going on with our politics. Reading the comments on the GB news about your court case, somebody said, I love reading comments because that gives you a real good feeling of what's going on in the public eye. And somebody said, oh, Labour, they're no good. We need to get back to the Tories. No one's great, but, we need to get back to them. And you just said passing the baton. What's going on politically then? Are they all buddies?
Yes, I'm afraid that, I went to Labour MPs I knew in November 22 and said, look, this is so important. You've got to stop them vaccinating the little babies. At least do that. And they turned around to me and said, Labour Party said, we're not taking on Big Pharma. It shows you who's got the power in the world. I mean, MPs are supposed to work, whatever party, you're supposed to work for the people who voted for you. We're the servants of the people. We're not their masters. And they are your masters. They're the people. And it's clearly not the case. Not the case in our parliament. Our politicians are working for someone else. And they're all working for someone else. They're not working for you. The party system is completely corrupted from the top down. They are the institutions with the rotten apples, as well as, I believe, the judiciary and the police, unfortunately, now. That's been my experience. And therefore, if everyone's on the same team, it's not a race between the blue and the red and the yellow and the green team for the finish line. It's a relay race. And all that happened when you had that general election is Rishi Sunak handed the baton. Now, I've never seen a man look so happy as Rishi Sunak after he lost the election. Labour are in with a massive majority, and which is unwarranted, and they can do whatever they want, and they're pressing on with all the same policies. You know, the vaccines are still being rolled out. No proper inquiry into what went on. Net zero, the suicide note of net zero is pressing on. It's going to make everyone poorer, colder, and less free. The direction of travel is all the same. They're all signed up to Agenda 2030, which nobody wants to talk about in Parliament. No one ever talks about in the media. Agenda 2030. Karen, unless we make a stand now, and I think the time's coming very close. I think it will be this year.
Yes. Oh, Andrew, you're frozen for some reason. I don't know if you can hear me. You might catch up in a minute. The time is coming. Whilst we wait to see if Andrew comes back, the time is coming. We are in 2025. It's Mad March, as we know, and I think a lot of people have kind of woken up since 2020, since the start of this crazy world in which we're living. It's very exciting times, if you are aware, biblical times. I don't think I'm going to be able to get Andrew back on this thread. So I'm going to wind it up, and I'll bring Andrew back another time. But if you have been watching this and you have got any comments, please do put the comments in the description, because it's such an important subject. And also share the video, maybe like or dislike it, whatever. But you know, make some noise. And I will also put on the bottom of the description how you can help Andrew to carry on doing the amazing work that he has been doing so far. So he needs our support financially and emotionally, spiritually, energetically. He really needs help. So that's what I'm asking you to do. Please help him. And again, thank you very much for watching. Oh, Andrew, you're back.
I'm back. I don't know what happened. Did we run out of the Zoom call?
No, we didn't. You froze. So I've been chatting.
You froze for me as well.
Oh, just as we were saying that. How bizarre.
How bizarre.
Yeah.
Well, the answer, the baton handover. Rishi Sunak had made. I was well aware that Rishi Sunak had told all the generals and admirals and air vice marshals in the MOD that he didn't want to be a wartime prime minister. And I think you can see, in your followers will be able to see. I mean, I predicted about a year ago that they're going to try and get us into a big war. They need a big war to cover up. And this is all the parties. I mean, Starmer, he loves wearing his khaki. A man who's completely compromised on so many levels about his private life and his time at the CPS. If this all comes out, I mean, he'll be in prison. And of course, we had Sunak, who I believe he controls 11% of the Moderna shares through a trust in the Cayman Islands called Theleme. $500 million worth of interest, which he gave Moderna £1 billion of taxpayers' money for the new factory at Oxford, and contracts for 150 million doses a year for 10 years of experimental vaccines. That's a gold-plated contract, and he owns 11% of the company, I believe. They're also corrupt. It is unbelievable. But I think the truth is going to come out, and I think the people will need to stand up at some stage this year I will say to you that Starmer's clearing 3,000 prison places of hardened criminals now to make way for locking more of us up this summer.
Oh. And who's he looking to lock up? Likes of the freedom fighters?
Well, people who put out misinformation, disinformation. They desperately want to get us into a war with Russia. That's been the plan for years. And that is to cover up the lies they've told us, the money they've stolen from us, and the crimes they've committed against us.
There is a hell on earth, isn't there? Really, I think we're,
Well, we have a choice. We can be
yes.
in Earth, or we can create something better. But
absolutely,
I'm not convinced anyone's coming on a white horse to save us. We'll have to save ourselves. But if we don't, the future for future generations, they will not even know the freedoms they've lost.
Yeah, absolutely. We're doing
well, I mean, what
you
say in 1984? If you want a vision of the future, I'll give it to you. It's a booted foot stamping on a human face forever. Well, I don't really accept that.
I agree. I totally agree. And I think we'll end it there then, Andrew. And I really do appreciate.
I think we're going to win. Honestly, we're going to win.
I agree. I totally agree. I think we've got to go. There's light at the end of the tunnel. We're going through some stuff, especially some individuals that are really fighting. What you've gone through and what you are going through, to say you are a true warrior. And there really are not enough men with balls at the moment. We need men like you, but where are they? Hopefully they're coming.
But you've got to remember that half of what they did to me was to scare the other MPs, and MPs generally are not very brave people. But I mean, they ostracised me to the point where for nearly 2 years they made me eat all my meals on my own in Parliament.
Oh my God! Solitary confinement.
I mean, if you did that to somebody in a business, you'd be done for bullying, wouldn't you?
Yes.
But I mean, I'm made of better stuff than that. And to be honest, there are 4,000 real people who work in Parliament: the cooks and the cleaners and the waiters, and they were all with me. And the support they gave me in private when no one was looking was unbelievable. Unbelievable.
That's fantastic, and that's what we need. The public, but we need people to speak out. That's the problem. People have not, they're frightened. And
I've spoken to so many doctors and cardiologists in private. They all know what the vaccines have done.
Yeah.
And they're just too frightened to speak out. But if one or two did, it would burst the dam.
It would. The tide will turn as well. And I think, like the likes of Kennedy, now we've got him in, it will be a knock-on effect.
I'm hoping we're going to have a tsunami of truth and justice coming across the Atlantic from America, which will be irresistible.
Absolutely.
And it will sweep away these pathetic, self-serving politicians we've got across the House of Commons now, with very, very few exceptions.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for listening to me today.
Yeah, thank you very much for being here, Andrew. And there's a way we can help you. We can buy your coffee, yeah? So we can help you sort of financially as well. I think, in fact, if you could send me something that I can put onto the description so people know
you can go on onto my website.
And what is your website?
Bridgen.uk.
Okay, I'll put it in abridgen.uk. Okay, and there's a way we can put some money in your piggy bank as such. Okay, we'll keep doing the good work. Thank you so much, Andrew. I really do wish you all the best. Okay.
I wish us all the best, and we're going to get there, I promise you. Okay.
Indeed, we will. All right. God bless.